Good morning.
And we're on it.
And we are on it. A special Wednesday edition of Fumblegate. We're glad you're here with us, and we thank you for taking a little bit of time out of your day to listen to us talk a little bit of football. I'm Jason. That's Adam. Our Twitter handles are across the bottom of the screen. Follow us. Follow the show. Facebook.com/Fumblegate. If you still do the Facebook thing, throw us a like on there and post something on there. We don't really care what it is. So we'll start today with college football talk. A couple of key topics there, game picks, upset picks. He has more than a dozen.
A myriad of kickers, again.
More than a dozen kickers to talk about
the
here.
The gift that keeps on giving.
Yeah, exactly. So he has that to go over. And then, of course, we'll move on to the NFL towards the end of the show. We will talk a little bit about the Myles Garrett situation since it happened after we were on the air last week. So we'll touch on that. And also maybe a long-time proven NFL quarterback maybe nearing the end of the line. So
it could be the end of a run, end of an era.
And, of course, at the end of the show, we will bring you everyone's new favorite game.
Will they cover?
And you know who we're talking about there if you followed us over the last few weeks.
Unfortunately, it's getting to be only one team.
They're the only one left.
They got a lock on the number one pick right now.
As of now, yeah. Still things, and Washington's trying to hang around. All right. So let's start in college football. And, of course, the huge news in college football was the injury to Tua Tagovailoa against Mississippi State, the hip injury, the dislocated hip, the posterior wall fracture. He's already undergone surgery. The expectation is from his doctors is that he will make a full recovery. The initial reports were kind of scary because this was deemed the similar type of injury that Bo Jackson had that ended his career. However, the difference being at the time they didn't know how bad Bo Jackson's injury was, and he kept playing on it.
He tried to play through it.
Right, and that's what made it worse and eventually caused him to have a hip replacement. That's not the case with Tua Tagovailoa. He's already undergone surgery. They think actually in the next few days he's going to go back to Tuscaloosa and actually begin a little bit of rehab.
Yeah.
The long-term prognosis is good for a full recovery. However, initial thoughts from doctors and experts in that field were that he would not be able to get back to full football activities as far as throwing, moving, all that kind of stuff for 6 months. Yeah. And so that's going to put him in a difficult decision as far as his future goes. If you're not getting back to throwing until 6 months from now, you're talking April and into May, and that's right around draft time. And of course, before the injury, he was a presumptive top 3 pick with Joe Burrow and Chase Young. And now he's become a bit of a medical mystery, and no one really knows because this type of injury is obviously not common. If the only common link to this injury is Bo Jackson, and that was 30 years ago, or nearly 30 years ago. So really nobody knows right now. I read an article saying that from one executive, who of course was going to stay anonymous for it, that he would probably still be a late first-round pick at this point. And so he has a decision to make. He has the ability to, if he wants, to go back to Alabama next year for his senior year. Has that option on the table to him. Should he consider going back to Alabama for his senior year, or should he just go ahead and cash in?
Right now, as it stands, I think he has to consider going back. Here's the problem that he's going to run into, and for those of you who don't know, the NFL has an early entry deadline that players have to basically declare themselves eligible. The deadline this year is slightly earlier because the combine is slightly earlier because the league season ends slightly earlier this year. The deadline to declare is actually January 20th, which if you were playing in the national championship game would only be 2 weeks after the national championship to make your decision. That's where it's going to be interesting because by all accounts, by January 20th, he won't know at all how he's responding to being able to do football things again. The recovery window, like you mentioned, 6 months. Basically 3 months from now, or 2 months from now, knowing how he's going to be football-wise in the 4 months following is probably not going to be a clear picture at that time. So right now, I would say he needs to plan to come back to school because of the what ifs that lie between now and the time he would need to make a decision. Now, if because he's injured, he's going to get a lot more information than the average player who would still be playing as far as what his prospects still are. He's going to have the time to go out and find out, am I still a first-round draft pick? Have I fallen into the second round? Where his options are going to lie as far as where he might get drafted. I think that all that's going to have to get taken into consideration for him. But you got to remember, like, coming back to Alabama isn't the worst thing in the world for a guy like him. He's a quarterback. He doesn't take hits in practice. He doesn't take a ton of hits in games because their offensive lines are always pretty good. And he's going to get top quality medical care. Like, we're not talking about a smaller school, even like a Central Michigan, where their medical facilities just aren't the same. Like, Alabama has top quality medical facilities, medical professionals, and people around him who can help him. It's not like going to the NFL as a step up as far as his recovery process or how he would heal from this injury. I don't know. It's so early. It's so hard to tell where this may go because obviously Alabama's going to be in contention for a national championship again next year. I haven't looked at the quarterback depth chart. I don't know who else they have on their roster. Obviously, he's a starter if he comes back fully healthy. But I think right now it's just too early to say, yeah, for sure he should come out. There's no reason for him to stay because you don't know how it's going to heal. And it puts into question, like you mentioned, probably a top 5 pick if he comes out healthy. Right now, consensus is he and Joe Burrow are the top 2 quarterbacks. Right now, 2 teams in the top 5 need quarterbacks. And I being the Dolphins and the Bengals. I think if he was one of those 2 picks, then obviously, yeah, he needs to come out. But with the injury, there's probably no path for him to be one of those top 5 guys. So to me, it makes more sense to go back. But, a lot can happen between now and obviously January 20th. And then obviously between now and the draft or next year's, football season. But, where he gets drafted, he's going to have time to figure out where he would end up lining up. But I think if he gets a grade that falls into the second round, then it's worth it for him to come back and be the number 1 quarterback in 2021.
It's an interesting debate, and as you said, it's still very, very early on in the process, and there's no way really to tell. If that report that I touched on earlier is correct, and turns out to be correct, that he may still go late in the first round. If I was him, I would strongly consider go ahead and going to the NFL. Yeah. It's similar to the Willis McGahee situation when he was coming out of Miami. He had that grotesque knee injury in the national championship game. Knew he was basically going to be out all of this first season. Yeah. Went ahead and started making the money though. Now on the other side, if you look at it, going from a top 5, crack it open. You don't have to be discreet about it. There you go. Going from a top 5 pick to potentially late first round in the 20s or what have you, with the pay scale the way it is right now, would likely initially cost himself probably around $20 to $25 million.
Yeah, that's a big difference.
It is a big difference, and I think that for that reason, the incentive is there to go back for a senior year, and if he's proven he can be healthy there, then he's right back at the top of the board in 2021. Yeah. The other thing is, you look on the other side of it, and obviously you know this, playing the game of football, it doesn't matter where you're at, you're always one play away from it being over with, and so the argument to be had there is if you're only one play away and you have the chance to go ahead and start making the money, then you go
one play where it's money, where you can make the money.
Absolutely, you make that play now. You talked about Alabama's structure for next year. Mac Jones will be the quarterback for the rest of this year. Tua's younger brother is at Alabama right now. I think he's number 3 on the depth chart, so he would be there for another year. I would say, I think he should still go ahead and go. Yeah. If the prognosis is correct and the prediction is right from that one executive, and he falls to the late first round, he's likely going to go to a team that won't necessarily need him right away, and he can basically use the rookie year as a red shirt And if you go to a team that's, a contender, but maybe he has a quarterback who is getting up there in age and maybe he only has a couple of years left, maybe he falls to the New Orleans Saints towards the end of the first round of the draft. Teddy Bridgewater's a free agent at the end of this year, likely going to go somewhere where he's going to get a chance to start next year. He played well when Drew Brees was hurt.
Yep.
Drew Brees is in his 40s now. He doesn't have much time left, probably a couple of more years. He's going to retire, and he'll step aside and probably move into the Saints front office. That would be a situation where there would not be a lot of pressure on him. Maybe they bring Bridgewater back on another one-year deal. They still have Taysom Hill there who could fill in if Brees were to get hurt. And so I would lean towards go ahead and start making the money while you can. And obviously the medical situation is what it is, and he's going to have his doctors and his rehabilitation people relay that information to the NFL that he's right on track. Once he gets recovered, he will be a full go. No limitations on his game whatsoever. And so for that reason, I would lean towards go ahead, start making the money now. But I also could see why, if anything goes wrong in his rehab, anything goes wrong at all, come back.
Yeah.
Spend the entire offseason, as you said, with Alabama's world-class facilities that they'll have down there, and get yourself healthy and go for a senior year.
And here's the other thing too, and maybe I'm being a bit hypocritical because I've always said I would never tell a kid not to go get the money, but like you mentioned, the difference of up to $25 million in draft position makes a difference. And the other thing that's gonna be a factor for him too is he's been injured before. He's probably going to be the most medically scrutinized player, whether he comes out now or next year. He's going to be the most medically scrutinized player probably in the draft because of the severity of this hip injury, the ankle injury that he's had surgery on before. The style of play, he needs to be healthy or really close to 100% healthy for him to be effective. He can't play very banged up, especially in the NFL. You can't play banged up. You got to be 100%. And he's going to be scrutinized regardless of whether it's now or later. To me, it's going to depend on, again, how healthy is he. And again, there's a 2-month window right now before he needs to actually make a final decision. But it'll be interesting to see what happens. Obviously, all accounts, the hip surgery went well. Like you mentioned, he should be back in Tuscaloosa soon, start working on his rehab. But I don't know. We'll see what happens to him. Like I hope the best for the kid. Obviously, he's a superior talent. But those injury questions are going to hang over his head, whether it's 2020 or 2021. But we'll see what his final decision is, and wherever it is, it's going to be the best decision for him. And that's at the end of the day, it's the best decision for Tua, not the best decision for us. And he'll make the right decision for what he needs to do. Yeah, smart guy, smart family. His family has moved actually from Hawaii to Alabama because Tua and his brother are both there on campus. So, and I would imagine, given their setup down there, money is probably not an issue for them. I don't know that for certain, but to be able to pack up everything and move from Hawaii to Alabama, I'm gonna guess that they don't need him to turn pro and start making the money. No, I think they'll be okay, and
And I'm not insinuating there's any kind of
there
shady stuff going on. I'm not trying to insinuate that.
But given the nature of college football, we know that's probably happening, and he's going to be supported whether he stays at Alabama or moves on. But
right,
as much as you're not insinuating, there still is
the implication is going to be there.
The implication that there's probably some help from Alabama alumni or otherwise that they're there, but that's the way it should be, in my opinion. And
that's the other thing.
Thankfully, the NCAA has started to move in that direction where kids can capitalize on their own image, which Tua Tagovailoa, God, I can't say that name.
Tua Tagovailoa.
Thank you. Is one of those players who would be capitalizing on his image had that rule been in place prior. So
let's move to other on-field action, and we're going to go out west. And the college football playoff rankings are out. Really, nothing changed across the top. The interesting thing of note is that the Pac-12 is right there as far as a berth goes. You have Oregon at 6, Utah at 7, behind the top 5. That did not change from last week. And the committee said, with Tua's injury, that Alabama's overall performance in totality against Mississippi State was strong enough to warrant them staying at 5 and not dropping. But going forward, and we touched on this last week, you brought it up specifically in good detail, the situation with Alabama going forward is they are likely not to play for the SEC title. Yeah. It's likely to be LSU. Georgia has already clinched the SEC East. They're into the championship game. LSU has Arkansas this week and Texas A&M next week to close out the regular season.
Should handle them.
Yeah, they're going to bludgeon Arkansas, and Texas A&M has been very, very Jekyll and Hyde, but they're also Alabama's best win. So you're looking at Oregon and Utah sitting pretty right now at 6 and 7. You have to think, and I wonder, they're in a good spot to get into the playoff. Not both of them.
No, not both of them.
One of them.
The Pac-12 champion, the one-loss Pac-12 champion, is in a good position.
Are they guaranteed a berth if they both finish the regular season 11-1?
So the scenario is, if the Pac-12 championship game is a matchup of 11-1 teams, which would automatically guarantee the Pac-12 champion to be a 12-1 Pac-12 champion, do they currently ahead of them bypass both Bama and Georgia to get into the college football playoff? I say yes. And here's why. One thing, a couple of things in front of them. One, Bama is likely not going to be playing for the SEC championship, which means they don't have a 13th game, essentially. And they're going to be a one-loss non-conference championship playing team that I don't know that you can leave a one-loss Pac-12 champion out because of that. Georgia, here's the thing with Georgia. Georgia has the ability to knock LSU out, but if they lose to LSU in the SEC championship, they're a 2-loss team, and they're not getting in. So the two teams in front of them don't have the ability to stay ahead of them because, one, they're either losing or not playing in the conference championship game, and two, the quality of win. Again, Bama, if they beat Auburn, their best quality win is going to be a number 12 Auburn team, which happened to beat Oregon, but Oregon's only loss being to Auburn makes it a little bit better for them because Auburn has been a top 25 team all season. Utah has only lost to USC, a little bit tougher on their resume. But again, I think the committee values conference championship games and the winners of conference championships over one-loss teams. Now, if there were 2-loss teams in discussion, which I don't think this season there's going to be, that could change the scenario. But as it stands, a one-loss conference championship team still gets in over a one-loss Alabama team, in my opinion.
Yeah, if the scenario happens, the winner will jump Alabama. I don't think there's any question about that. You touched on one scenario that I think will be the one caveat and could be the downfall of the Pac-12 champion, assuming Oregon-Utah, the winner finishes 12-1. The one scenario that I could see him not getting in is if Georgia beats LSU for the SEC championship. Agreed. Because I do not see, with the way they've played, that you can drop LSU from 1 all the way down to 5 with the schedule they've played, with the wins they have, especially if it's Oregon, because they have the common opponent in Auburn. LSU beat Auburn,
and one team did.
That's correct, and the overall quality of wins. LSU can still quasi-claim the win over Texas. I'm over declaring it a top 10 win because Texas is now 6-4.
Yeah, Texas has fallen off a cliff.
But LSU has the road win at Alabama. They have the win over Auburn. They have the win over Florida. You go down the line, and the resume stacks up, and just the eye test. And that's not to say Oregon is a bad football team. No. Oregon's a good football team.
Oregon doesn't suck.
And Auburn had to score with less than 10 seconds left to beat Oregon. So that factors in, too. But, again, I don't see if that scenario happens and Georgia beats LSU, I think the Pac-12 would still be on the outside looking in. They would have a gripe, and a legit gripe, because of it. But at the end of the day, You want the 4 best teams
Yeah.
to play for the college football playoff and to play for the national championship. I agree that they want to place the emphasis on the conference championships, but look at the quality of team in the Pac-12 compared to the quality of team in the SEC.
I agree.
Now, there are some bad teams in the SEC. Make no mistake about it. LSU stomping Arkansas this coming Saturday is not going to do anything for their resume.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't help them. Only helps Joe Burrow's Heisman campaign.
Exactly. He puts up numbers for a Heisman that probably they should start inscribing his name on it now. So right now, Oregon and Utah, they have to keep taking care of business, and we'll talk about that here in just a moment. They also need LSU. They need Georgia to fall. Georgia's got to drop out because even if Georgia
can't beat LSU in the championship game.
That's correct.
If Georgia,
Georgia
beats LSU in the championship game, I agree with your scenario that they both have to be in at that point because you're not going to drop Georgia out of the top 4 by winning. Obviously.
No, you'll move Georgia up to 3 and LSU would drop to 4, which, by the way, that would be a fun semifinal, Ohio State LSU.
Yeah, that would be fun, and that would be the one that
it should be for the championship. But
yeah. Well, they've screwed that up before.
Well,
where
yeah,
the championship game is played in the semifinal rather than the final. But I think, like you mentioned, I think that's the one scenario. Again, this is all assuming that the Pac-12 championship is the Pac-12 champion is a 12-1 champion, and I do tend to agree that it has to be Oregon. It makes it much more difficult if it's Utah because of their loss to USC. Who's very mediocre, probably going to fire their head coach after the season. Everything looks like that. I think that makes it a slightly more difficult road for the Pac-12 if Utah ends up being the Pac-12 champion. But the other thing, too, is you talk about quality of wins and late season quality wins. The Pac-12 championship game is going to be, at worst, a 6 versus 7 if they are both 11-1. It's at worst going to be a 6 versus 7 in that scenario. Talk about a late season quality win, beating a top 10 team in the Pac-12 championship game would certainly help boost the resume. Now that same scenario could play out obviously in the SEC championship with a 1 versus a 4 with Georgia and LSU, assuming they both take care of business down the stretch.
Right.
Even the Big Ten championship game, now the closest Big Ten team being Penn State, who has to play Ohio State first already, but then Minnesota, who has fallen all the way to 10 now with their loss to Iowa last week. Ohio State, if Minnesota would somehow find a way to beat Ohio State, again, the same scenario, is Ohio State good enough to stay in, even losing to Minnesota in the Big Ten championship?
Well, let me pose another situation for you, and you can go down this rabbit hole. There's a lot of fun scenarios. What if Georgia loses before the SEC championship and then beats LSU? Would you put a 1-loss Pac-12 champ in over a 2-loss SEC champion? And would you also? And then what do you do with LSU?
Yeah, there's a lot of fun scenarios. I don't see Georgia losing one of their last 2, but this is why you play the games because you got to find out where everybody's going to finish.
Right.
But it'll be the conference championship games will be very interesting if everything remains the same as where it is right now. The conference championship games will be very interesting to see how they fall. Again, assuming it's Georgia versus LSU. At this point, it's Ohio State versus Minnesota, and then obviously Oregon versus Utah. Those 3 games could have tremendous importance on the college football playoff, assuming that the rest of the games play out. Now, Ohio State's got the toughest road to the conference championship game, obviously against Penn State and then Michigan, who somehow decided to figure out how to play offense this last week against Sparty and their pretty good defense.
I think Sparty's quit.
I think Sparty has quit as well, and I tend to say that Mark D'Antonio is now severely on the hot seat, in jeopardy of not making a bowl game.
Yeah.
In fact, every team in Michigan is eligible for a bowl except for Michigan State.
I wonder with him if it's just coming to a point where his run there is just kind of run its course. And it is what it is at this point. He's not changing who he is.
No.
Granted, he's won a lot of ball games there.
He did.
And he's had a lot of success there, but
still a basketball school.
At some point it becomes kind of like a Marvin Lewis scenario in Cincinnati. How long can you run the same message back before it just gets stale and doesn't resonate with your players?
Yeah, kind of like Michigan. Same thing with Harbaugh at Michigan. Like you're just resigned yourself to winning between 8 and 10 games per season, then you're okay with it.
Yeah,
but maybe Michigan State is okay with it. Maybe they're okay with most years winning 7, 8, 9 games. Every once in a while winning 10, beating Michigan sometimes. Like maybe they're okay with that. Again, Michigan State's a basketball school. We know they have they're national title contenders in basketball almost every season. And football is kind of secondary. Whereas at Michigan, football is God, and that's their most important thing. And they're, at this point, they're worried about meeting Michigan State because they can't compete with Ohio State. But
they won the state championship.
Congratulations. I mean, who cares?
Most people would say Ohio State owns Michigan.
Owns
the state of Michigan.
What about the year when Central Michigan won the state championship by beating Sparty, and Sparty beat Michigan, and the Chippewas won the state championship? Like, who cares?
Get them rings. Get them state title rings if you're that worried about it.
Yeah, good job, Michigan. Get state title rings, whatever.
Let's move on to 3 games to talk about this week, and we'll start with the 2 in the Pac-12 we talked about. Oregon on the road at Arizona State. I think Arizona State, a lot of people bought into the iron sulfide, the fool's gold, with them for the early stretch of the season. They started out 5-1. They've since lost 4 straight.
Yeah.
And a couple of ugly ones in there, most recently last week to Oregon State. That's never a good loss to have on your resume. But it is in Tempe, so Oregon has to make the flight down and go on the road here. So I'm looking at this one. I think this is a closer ball game than a lot of people would expect. I think Arizona State, this is their last chance this year to really make a statement nationwide. It also, with Arizona State, not as impressive a looking a win over Sparty.
Yeah.
Given where both teams are now.
Sparty not so hot anymore.
Not so hot. But I think Arizona State, because their next game, I believe, is against Arizona, and it's the big rivalry game there in the state. Of course, both teams are not very good, and outside of the state of Arizona, probably not many people going to care. So I think Oregon wins this one. I have them winning just by a touchdown. Because it's on the road, it'll be a primetime game. As you see, it's on at 7:30 on Saturday night, so it'll be starting in the sunlight, going into darkness out in Arizona. But I like Oregon to win, but I think it'll be tougher than a lot of people think because I think Arizona State will put all their eggs into this basket to try and knock off Oregon. And if they pull the upset here, this is the fatal blow for Oregon. They're done as far as the playoff goes.
100% done. And we mentioned that the Pac-12 to have a shot, they both have to be 11-1. Utah and Oregon, the 2 best that are left. I don't know if it's closer than you think. I think Oregon covers this one. Arizona State, just nothing about them impresses me. They're giving up as many points as they're scoring, and they're not scoring a ton. 24 points per game, just not. Some of it looks good, but you're padded by teams like Washington State, who doesn't play defense, UCLA, who you gave up 42 to, but you happen to score 32 in that game. Nothing about Arizona State impresses me except for Herm Edwards being the GM of the team. I think Oregon wins this one. I think they cover it. It's 14.5. I think they cover it. I don't think this is a game that Arizona State should be worried about. I think they cover this one easy, and Arizona State's going to be fighting Arizona for the bowl eligibility there the last week of the season.
Well, they may not because Arizona's sitting at 4-6 right now, and they get Utah Saturday night, a little Pac-12 after dark if you're up that late here in the Eastern time zone. Utah on the road at Arizona. Kevin Sumlin has not turned out to be a very good hire at Arizona, similar to what he was at Texas A&M. No clue how to play defense at all. Arizona's giving up 37 points per game and 480 yards per game, which is about as rancid as it gets.
Yeah,
and
that's good.
You're going against a Utah team that can score better than they have in years past.
Averaging 35 points per game this year.
Huntley has been very, very good, and we know what their defense is. The Utah's defense is one of the best year in and year out, and I think this is way too much for Arizona. Even though Arizona is at home in this game, I have Utah winning this one in a rout. The number on this one's 23, and I have Utah winning this game 38-10. I don't think this one's particularly close.
Yeah, they don't. You got them covered and everything. I got broken mics over here. I'm just making stuff up. I agree. I think Utah covers this one. They're getting 23. I think they cover the 23. Arizona just probably doesn't have any business being in this game. As much as I like Khalil Tate, Arizona's quarterback, the running and passing part of it, he turns the ball over a lot. Utah's defense punishes people for turnovers. They're only allowing 11 points per game And they protect the ball on offense. I think they cover this one easily. I think Arizona is going to be a little upset they're even on the same field this week. And the reason I said Arizona.
Ouch.
And the reason, the Pac-12 has to make a statement. If they want to get into the college football playoff, both of these teams, Oregon and Utah, have to make a statement and show that they're going to be able to leapfrog both Alabama and Georgia, particularly in the scenario that we mentioned. If Georgia beats LSU, they got to have the best resumes possible for that playoff committee. Because at this point, we're assuming that 2 undefeated conference champions are already going to be in. Clemson guaranteed. Obviously Ohio State, 2 tough home games. Penn State, Michigan to finish the season, but they really got to put their best resume out there, and they're going to have to score a bunch of points to do that. They got to show that they can play with the big boys. And scoring a bunch of points is one way to do that, and I think that's why Utah's got to come out and do it this week against Arizona.
Let's move to the biggest game of the week, and you just touched on it. Penn State going to Columbus. Obviously, Ohio State wins this one. They're still sitting in the catbird seat anyway to play for the Big Ten title, but this one here they can bury Penn State, and Penn State can go to the Outback Bowl or something similar to what they played last year when they lost to Kentucky.
Got him.
But this game in Columbus, Ohio State for much of the year really has not been challenged. And by the way, I think they get Chase Young back for this game after
his 2-game suspension is finally up for
he
taking
served
a
a suspension. I think Ohio State wins easily here. I have Ohio State by 3 touchdowns. I have it at 41-20. One thing I will say on the Penn State side is you Nittany Lion fans, some of you are absolute, and pardon my French, some of you fans are absolute shitbags because Penn State quarterback Sean Clifford said in interviews this week he's had to delete his social media entirely because he's been getting death threats from fans after Penn State's loss to Minnesota.
Oh, my God.
To the point it hasn't stopped for more than a week after the loss that he's had to entirely get rid of all of his accounts. He normally would go dark for the couple days before, couple days after a game. He said to totally eliminate his social media.
It's so shitty. Like, it's so dumb that fans are like that. Like, first of all, remember these are kids. Like, all of these are kids. Like, the oldest guy on a college football field is probably 21 years old. So maybe legal to drink, especially like these guys who we know a lot of them from schools like this leave early if they're successful. Stop. Like, what are you doing? Like, nothing in your life is that important.
No.
That you need to threaten a kid over how he performed in a game because your favorite team lost. Oh no. You're not that important. No one cares. Like, don't go out and threaten people's lives over that shit. It's stupid. But
you want to hide behind a long ass Twitter handle with no profile picture, so nobody can know who you are.
Yeah, show up on campus one day and threaten him to his face and see what his offensive linemen do. Anyway,
sorry, I had to get that off my chest because it's absolute bullshit.
I hadn't heard that, and I'm glad you brought it up because fans are stupid.
Anyway, back to the game.
Back to the game. So two things. I got 2 questions for you because these are interesting. Fans supposedly boycotting game day because of their SEC bias. Fair or foul? ESPN game day and Fox game day are both going to be on campus, opposite ends of the stadium. Fans are planning on boycotting ESPN college game day because of their SEC bias. Is that fair or foul?
It's ridiculous.
It's stupid.
It's absolutely ridiculous. You have your own network as well. And you notice, too, that ESPN doesn't get the A-level SEC games most of the time. That goes to CBS. Yeah. You heard the SEC on CBS? Yeah. And, oh, by the way, Fox owns 49% of the Big Ten network. Yeah. So you want to talk about bias? Yes, ESPN has funded the SEC network, but the Big Ten has gotten Fox to fund its own network, too. Shut up. And by the way, ESPN's College Game Day is a way better show than Fox. And also, by the way, I wonder who's going to be on set for the Big Ten Network, or the Fox pregame show.
Guess who it is?
I wonder. Who could it be? The guy that just quit your program, or I'm sorry, retired due to health problems. And this will be the last time you see him before he's in Los Angeles next year coaching USC. Shut up. It's fun. Enjoy it.
Here's the other thing too about that is like Fox trying to compete with ESPN by dubbing this the big noon kickoff game of the week.
That's their tag with every week.
It's not just for this game.
They dubbed that for the Michigan-Iowa game that wound up 10-3.
It's so dumb. Like
they're trying.
They're trying hard. They're trying hard. Should this game be a primetime game though?
Of course it should be a
100%.
primetime game.
100%
There were some other games that were early in the year picked for primetime. I'm sorry. This game...
How is this overlooked that they were like, yeah, let's kick this game off at noon? Like going into the season, Penn State, Ohio State, and you knew they were going to be in competition with each other for the Big Ten championship.
The only reason why I could see
Why is this not the primetime game?
Because it's not in Penn State. Because
Who cares?
they always have a night, the whiteout. Ohio State doesn't do anything. I agree. No, I'm with you. I get it. But Ohio State doesn't do anything like that because they don't really need to.
They don't have to.
Granted, it's a cool thing that Penn State does. It's cool as hell having the whiteout at night with 120,000 people. But absolutely, it should have been a primetime game. But Fox was more than glad to say, hey, we'll take it.
Fox will take it whenever
we'll take
they
it
give
for the
to
noon
them,
kickoff.
for sure. But yeah, just a couple things about that game. Anyway, back to the actual game. I got Ohio State winning this one. I just... Penn State, the way they looked against Minnesota, looked very average against Minnesota.
Could have lost at home to Indiana.
Could have lost at home to Indiana. I don't disagree. Like a close game with Michigan, close game with Iowa. Like Penn State looks very pedestrian compared to Ohio State. Penn State's still a really good football team, but they look very pedestrian compared to an Ohio State game. Now, Justin Fields, quote of the week. Maybe we have to play all 4 quarters this week, which I thought was kind of funny. I don't know if they even have to play all 4 quarters. This is a game that I think could get away from Penn State very quickly.
He'll play to the second half.
Yeah, he'll play in the second half. I don't know if he has to play all 4 quarters, though. I think this game gets away from Penn State. They don't have an explosive offense to come back from a deficit, which I think they're going to be at all game. They're going to start to force stuff down the field. Sean Clifford's going to have to try and make plays that I'm not sure he's capable of making against Ohio State's defense. Ohio State's defense giving up less than 10 points per game, 216 yards per game. Now, their schedule hasn't been the toughest, but anytime you put up that stat line, it doesn't suck.
You're 10 games in, you're putting up those numbers. And Buckeyes fans, for all of you that are whining and complaining about Justin Fields not being in the Heisman conversation right now, you need him to play all 4 games in this one if he's going to have any shot to get to New York, let alone get votes for the trophy. Now, granted, his numbers are spectacular. He's been responsible for 41 touchdowns, 31 through the air, and he's only thrown 1 pick. So the numbers are fantastic. He's not had to play a full 4 quarters most weeks. He has not had to do it against the strongest of schedules, as you said. They have some nice wins on the schedule. Cincinnati is a very nice win. They blew out Cincinnati. They blew out Wisconsin. So as we've talked about, that's not all on Justin Fields, the fact that he is not finishing out games because his team around him is just so good, except for taking a bye last week and giving up 21 points to friggin' Rutgers.
Yeah.
What's up with that? But they also
not covering as incorrectly predicted by us.
Clearly they were
cover.
Clearly they were looking ahead to Penn State, and they only beat Rutgers 56-21.
Yeah, the old 35-point win, not quite good enough.
So if Buckeye fans, if you want Justin Fields in the Heisman conversation, you need Penn State to hang around in this one,
he still has an opportunity because Penn State, Michigan, Big Ten championship game. Like he has a really good 3-game stretch to really up his resume. Again, I think Joe Burrow is still the runaway winner. Even with a close loss in the SEC championship game, I think he's still the runaway winner. The statistics that he's putting up, 77% completion percentage. I saw a recent list of the highest completion percentages from the past, I believe it was the past 6 seasons prior to this. The best prior to this was 66%. So
I saw a
he puts
stat
up
too.
some nasty numbers.
And Pro Football Focus does work on the college side, and they go way in depth. By the way, it's a great follow. They've figured out the completion percentage for guys on passes that are not screens.
Yeah.
He's completing balls at like 74% on passes that are not screens.
77% overall.
Yeah.
That doesn't suck. For those of you out there who don't know, that doesn't suck.
Justin Fields is not too bad himself, but again,
he's good. He's good. Like nothing away from Justin Fields, but
and you can always
his resume just doesn't stack up when you look at the level of competition and then
you can always
not playing 4 quarters.
And Buckeye homers are going to say, well, just think of all the numbers that he could have put up had he played all 4 quarters. The reality is he didn't play all 4 quarters, so he didn't put up the numbers. You can't put up this BS. Imagine all these numbers. That's great. I can imagine all the numbers I want.
You can't extrapolate over 4 quarters. Like, oh, well, what if he
I'm
was
sure.
playing against the
I'm
second
sure
team
there's
in the
been
fourth
games
quarter?
where Joe Burrow didn't play from start to finish. Imagine what his numbers could have been if he'd have played them all. So that's another rabbit hole you could go down. Again, Buckeye fans, if you want Justin Fields to get to New York for the Heisman Trophy ceremony and to finish second to Joe Burrow, he's got to put up big numbers and play the full game against Penn State. All right. Upset pick of the week. Who you got?
I got 2 this week, and I went out on a limb. I'm trying to Jason Grefer it up. I got some good ones for you. I got Oklahoma State, the Fighting Mullets, going down at West Virginia.
I thought about that one.
Yep, 3 weeks ago played Baylor tough, 17-14. Just beat Kansas State on the road.
And Kansas State beat Oklahoma.
Yep, and they have to win this one to keep their bowl eligibility alive. I got West Virginia winning this one. Oklahoma State coming to town. West Virginia winning. Their 7-point dog. I got West Virginia winning at home. Okay. And then the second one I got, this one not much of a stretch as the other one, but you picked them early in there. I'm picking them now. I got Washington going to Colorado as a 14.5-point dog and leaving without a win. Colorado coming off their win against Stanford, 16-13. Washington just played a close game, stinker of a game against Oregon State 2 weeks ago, 19-7.
I watched them. That was a bad football game.
400 and something total yards, but they only managed to put up 19 points on them. And Oregon State sucks. So yeah, I got Washington going to Colorado. Got the thin air up there. I got the Buffaloes winning, beating Washington this week as a 14.5-point dog. So West Virginia over Oklahoma State, Colorado over Washington. Those are my 2 this week.
My main upset pick this week, I'm going to say Texas goes on the road and beats Baylor. Baylor, obviously, the 28-3 collapse last week against Oklahoma.
Oh, man. Big 12, way to shoot yourselves in the foot. Baylor, way to shoot the Big 12s in the
Baylor
foot.
pulling in Atlanta Falcons there. But as we talked about last week, these 2 weeks were Baylor's chance to prove that they should have been in the college football playoff conversation, blowing a 25-point lead at home to Oklahoma. I think they laid everything out on the line there. I think there's going to be a hangover effect here. Now, granted, Texas has been rather blech the last couple of months.
That's a good sound effect.
I mean, they've really I think they've alternated wins and losses like every week for the last 6 weeks.
They have.
And I think also, too, they need a win. Tom Herman needs a win here to save his job because the expectations for Texas were a lot higher than 6-4.
Yep.
But that's where they are right now. But I think Texas goes on the road and beats Baylor. Another one to keep an eye on here, and I wouldn't be shocked if this happens. Look out for Indiana to pull the upset over Michigan. That is in Bloomington. Indiana's a good football team. I think they're 7-3, 7-4. We're right there with Penn State stride for stride in Happy Valley last week. That game is, as I said, it's in Bloomington. I would not be shocked. Now, granted, Michigan's been playing a lot better over recent weeks. They
decided to play offense all of a sudden.
They are improving, but look out for Indiana in that one. I think that one's going to be one right there. The Hoosiers are going to be in that one all the way to the end. And if some things go their way, I would not be shocked if they pull the upset. I'm surprised the number is where it's at. Indiana plus 10. But I watch out for that one. That could be an interesting one. It's a game mid-afternoon, flying under the radar. Indiana's having a really nice season. And don't be shocked if Indiana pulls the upset over Michigan there. So, again, Texas over Baylor is my upset pick. Both of us in the Big 12 for upset picks.
I went a ranked one this week. I got a Pac-12 one just for you. I got a 14-point dog winning this week.
There you go.
Yeah, and here's the other thing, too. Don't leave it up to kickers because we're going to tell you why right now.
Well, go ahead.
Fumblegate Fatty Kicker of the Week coming at you. Strong contenders this week. Maris, you sent me this one. Maris, Luke Palladino missed from 30, got blocked from 30, got returned 88 yards for a touchdown. Nice 10-point swing there. They end up losing in double overtime to Jacksonville, 52-45. Rhode Island C.J. Carrick missed from 38 and 44. They end up losing to Maine, who scored a TD with 34 seconds left to win the game. They lose 34-30, left 6 points on the board there. Citadel's Jacob Godick missed from 34. By the way, he's been on this show before.
Repeat offender.
Jacob Godick. He missed from 34 after getting iced at the end of the first half. They iced him, missed it after getting iced. They lose to Chattanooga 34-33. Northern Arizona's Louis Aguilar missed from 42 to end the
repeat offender.
And the first half, they lose to Southern Utah 31-30. Valparaiso's Demetrius Letsonis, repeat offender, missed from 43.
I think you butchered his name again.
Yeah,
too.
whatever. I don't care. He's a kicker. They lost to Butler 24-21. Cal Poly's Colton Thieker, repeat offender, missed from 35 with a minute left. They lose to Eastern Washington 42-41. Frostburg State. See, we're digging into the bag of tricks here.
You went down the rabbit hole.
Oh, yeah. Frostburg State. Jeremy Harrison missed from 39 and 46. They lose to Glenville State 10-7. Here, down the rabbit hole we go. Kutztown. Dean Krisich missed from 51 as time expires. They lose to Slippery Rock 37-35. By the way, first loss of the season for Kutztown. They were undefeated up to that point. All those who had Kutztown in your
your elimination
your elimination pool, you lost on that one. Their first loss of the season to Slippery Rock on a missed field goal. Brockport's Dustin Moyle missed from 24, so they substitute the kicker. You miss inside train monkey range, you get substituted for Noah Papatino. Guess what? He missed from 36. They lose to SUNY Morrisville 24-21. Miss from inside train monkey range, you get substituted for another kicker. You still end up losing because you both missed because you suck. Brockport loses to SUNY Morrisville 24-21. California, the Pennsylvania California, Keaton Hire missed an extra point. They lose to Westchester 20-19. Here's why it's even more fun. They went for 2 when they were down 1 because they missed an extra point earlier in the game. They went for 2 to try and win the game. They could have just kicked the extra point to win the game. But
why would you do that?
Why would you do that? Because Keaton here missed the first extra point, so they had to go for 2 the second time. Geneva, Daniel Nordass.
Switzerland?
Yeah, Geneva. It's a college. I don't know. Who would have thought?
Neutral.
Geneva, Daniel Nordass. That's how, I'm assuming that's how it's pronounced.
It is now.
Nordass.
You can put another word behind it, too.
Missed from 41 and 45. They lose to Westminster 28-25. Last one, this is the runner-up of the week, but it would have been a winner in most weeks. Case Western Reserve's Robertson Albrecht misses from 46 in the fourth quarter, misses from 43 as time expires. They lose the first game of the season. Again, another undefeated team going down because of a kicker. Robertson Albrecht misses 46-43, both in the fourth quarter, 43 as time expires. They lose to Carnegie Mellon. Not really known for their football over there at Carnegie Mellon. We talked about the difficulty of getting in academically at Carnegie Mellon. Somehow they end up beating previously undefeated Case Western 24-21.
Just in case you don't know, Carnegie Mellon is on par academically with just about every Ivy League school there is.
Yeah,
that's how hard. That's how
suck academically.
That's how difficult the academics are there.
But this week's winner, and this is getting close to an all timer. This is a really good one, a local one for
Top
us
5
here in Cincinnati. This is definitely a top fiver. USF's Spencer Schrader. They're playing UC, playing the Bearcats. Got a chance to upset a top 20 team. But Spencer Schrader says, you know what? I'm going to take things into my own hands.
He's trying to get Charlie Strong fired.
Yeah, hell yeah, he is. He says, you know what? I'm going to miss from 50. A little bit difficult. I'll miss from 53. Kind of difficult.
Then it becomes,
at the end of the first half,
hold my beer.
I'm going to get a shot at a 43-yarder. By the way, the game's tied at this point. I'm going to get a shot at a 43-yarder to put my team up. Misses from 43. And then, with 2 minutes left to go in the game, he misses from 33. For those of you who are counting, that's 4 missed field goals. By the way, that equates to 12 points for those of you who don't do math very well. They end up losing to UC by what margin? Just 3. Just 3. 12 points left on the board. They end up losing by 3 to Cincinnati, 20-17. But when you miss 4 field goals, by the way, none of them short. The 50 and 53-yarder are not short, just missed. You missed 12 points by missing 4 field goals, and you lose by 3 to a ranked UC team. Not a good look. And for that reason, USF Spencer Schrader, you are this week's winner of the Fumblegate Fatty Kicker of the Week.
And now you may have cost Charlie Strong his job, because the only way South Florida can get bowl eligible, they have to upset top 20 Memphis this coming Saturday.
Which I actually peeked at, and then I realized that their kicker sucks, and that was not going to be my upset pick of the week.
Well, we could be talking about him next week in this very segment.
Let's hope so.
And then they have to go into the final week of the year and defeat the, 2 year ago national champions, UCF.
Yeah.
They have to beat Memphis and UCF the last 2 weeks just to get bowl eligible.
Not going to happen. Sorry, Charlie Strong.
Get to packing, Charlie. You're gone.
Yep. Better tidy up that resume. You're going to need it.
Absolutely. So there you go. Spencer Schrader, this week's winner of the Fumblegate Fatty Kicker of the Week. He missed 4 field goals. You're a strong nominee, and he was a
strong nominee. We didn't even really need the NFL day for that.
Well, let's move.
We took a peek at it, but
let's move to the NFL, and we touched on at the top of the show that we would take a little time to comment on this because it happened after we were off the air last week. Everybody knows the Myles Garrett situation. What happened in the game against Pittsburgh, and on indefinite suspension that is being appealed. The NFLPA really arguing that indefinite is not a part of the CBA language, and that a finite number needs to be put onto the suspension for Myles Garrett. It's already been determined
for on-field conduct.
On-field.
The indefinite for
Correct.
On-field conduct.
That's correct.
Not off-the-field
That's
conduct.
correct.
Which is what the NFLPA is arguing. I think they have a strong case. We're going to talk about that here in a second.
He's been suspended as of now for the rest of this season, including the postseason, and beyond is still yet to be determined. But and we'll talk about this here because his appeal is actually being heard today, and so we'll kind of give you our thoughts on how long his suspension should be. After a result of that, again, that should be announced a little bit later today. But I'm going to turn this over to you because you played the game of football and I did not. Is this what he did, swinging the helmet at Mason Rudolph? And you can have your own thoughts about Mason Rudolph because he kept going in this, and he really
was definitely goaded into it. There's no question about that.
Goaded into something against Rudolph, swinging the helmet that takes it to a whole new level. But again, I'm going to bow out here and hand this over to you because you played the game in college and in the NFL. Is there a worse thing you can do as a player on the field than to swing a helmet at another player?
I think at this point in where the game of football has developed to, and you look and you see the detractors or the defenders of Myles Garrett posting on social media, and they're like, well, look, the same thing happened back in 1984 and so on. So the game of football has changed so much, and the players have changed so much. Like, Ronnie Lott isn't cutting off his own pinky anymore. Like, don't get me wrong. Those dudes that played back in the day, long before my time in the 70s and 80s, and go back to leather helmets and all, way tougher dudes than we got now. There's no question. Those dudes were tough as nails, smoking cigarettes on the sidelines, taking shots of whiskey at halftime. The game of football has changed. So to compare it to days of yesteryear is not the same comparison. So I hate when people are like, well, look, it happened in 1987. Congratulations. Most of you weren't alive in 1987. That shit doesn't count. Like, yes, was it a little more acceptable? Like, let's not forget, we want to talk about the violence of football. Go back to the 20s when they almost got rid of football altogether because kids kept dying while playing football. Like, of course, worse things have happened in the game of football than this. But where football stands now, it is probably the most egregious thing I've seen since Albert Hainsworth stomping on the guy's head, which, again, equally is as awful. Everybody knows at this point, if you're particularly at the NFL level, that once the helmet comes off, it has to get dropped. You can't swing it at somebody. You can't do it. Like, you go back to the Kyle Turley situation when his quarterback got sacked and he I forget who it was. He ripped somebody's helmet off and, protecting his quarterback, and he threw it. He didn't swing at anybody. And for those of you who don't know, Kyle Turley was particularly unhinged as a football player. Like, he had a lot of on-field incidents, never hit anybody with a helmet. And he had helmets in his hand, never hit anybody with a helmet. And again, you want to talk about yesteryear, like, that was more than 15 years ago. That scenario never happened. Like, the NFL, and I see why they did it, because the NFL's emphasis has become on player safety. Like, that is the biggest problem with the NFL right now, and the biggest thing in social media and the biggest thing affecting players is player safety. And you look at the concussion settlements and the concussion lawsuits, and you look at the things they've implemented for player safety, how you can hit a quarterback, defenseless players, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The NFL has put an emphasis on protecting player safety, and every player who is in the league should understand that is the highest priority of the league. And these guys know they're professionals. Like, at the end of the day, this is their job and this is what they get paid to do. And at the end of the day, there are very few people in the league that have a genuine dislike for each other because they understand that they're all professionals. And that's why this is so shocking, because Myles Garrett, by all accounts, is a very nice person. If you recall earlier in the season, he got sucker punched by a fan, and he didn't react that way to a fan, let alone to a person who is his equal in the job place. I don't want to defend his actions other than I understand the heat of the moment argument. I understand if you look at the videotape, Mason Rudolph's trying to pull his helmet off initially. He grabs Mason Rudolph's face mask, at which point he gets kicked in the groin. By the way, after after he already has a hold of Mason Rudolph's face mask, which is at that point, I believe, Mason Rudolph's attempt to get his helmet back. But again, it all comes back to, once the helmet comes off, it has to go to the ground. You cannot swing it like a weapon. And everybody says, oh, well, Mason Rudolph's fine. Yeah, he's fine until he's not, right? Like, I shot a gun at him, but I didn't hit him, so he didn't die. Like, I swung his helmet, but he's okay. What if he knocked him unconscious? Like, what if for some reason he hits him in the wrong spot and it cracks his vertebrae in his neck? Like, there's so many worst case scenarios that could have happened there that thankfully didn't, where he just hit him in the head and Mason Rudolph took it and he stood up and he got drilled in the back. But the potential for injury was there, and a potential for a very severe injury. Like, if you watch the film of it, particularly in slow motion, it looks nasty. Like, if Mason Rudolph got knocked out cold there, you wouldn't have been surprised. Like, that's scary. Like, that's the biggest weapon on the football field. The same reason they don't allow helmet-to-helmet hits. You can't drop your head, and they have the targeting rule and all. That's the biggest weapon on the football field. And now you took it and swung it at a person who isn't protected by anything. Like, it's just a bad look, and I understand where the league is starting now. You can chime in on where you think the suspension is going to end. But again, being the professionals that they are, all NFL players need to understand that is not ever the solution. You cannot take a helmet and swing it at somebody else with where the league is now and their emphasis on player safety. I hate to rant and rumble about it, but so many uninformed, stupid people on social media think that was okay or justified or whatever. It's not. And I don't care if Mason Rudolph came back after him. I don't care if Mason Rudolph initiated it. You cannot swing a helmet. Like, again, I hate to use the scenario, but it's like, so you get into a bar fight and somebody pulls a gun. Like, you just don't do it. Like, so you got into a fight on the football field and you turn a helmet into a weapon. You just don't do it. And if you follow guys who played football, they're not supporting it. The guys who didn't play football, the guys like, oh yeah, Myles Garrett's justified. Well, guess what? You never played football. You're not justified in doing that. You can't do it. You just can't. But back to is the suspension warranted? I don't know that the suspension is even warranted, though. I don't know. What's your opinion on the suspension? The indefiniteness of the suspension. Do you feel like that's appropriate? I don't disagree with him being suspended for the rest of the season. Leaving it indefinite is the part that bothers me. What do you think about that?
Number one, Myles Garrett is lucky he wasn't arrested for assault.
100% agree, because if that happens anywhere else but an NFL football field, you're going to jail.
You're going to jail.
100% going to jail.
And Mason Rudolph actually had to put out a statement saying he was considering it on the field matter. He would not press charges. But the fact that lawyers it was being bandied about amongst lawyers tells you the severity of it. To put a finite number on this, this is, to me, the most egregious act you can commit on the field. And I left it to you to talk more in depth about this because you played the game. And it's the difference between you playing the game and me not playing the game, me wearing a headset or just watching it as a fan. That's the difference between the two, and that's why I chose not to go in depth on this. However, to me, it is the most egregious act, and Mason Rudolph, I said it from the get-go, should absolutely be fined for it because he was trying to pull off Garrett's face mask, and he charged back after him. Again, Mason Rudolph should absolutely be fined. I could even understand a suspension for
I'm a little surprised he didn't get suspended.
For even one game. I'm a little
surprised that he did not get suspended.
Even one game.
Given his antagonistic nature of it. Although I did see the mention on social media that punishment of playing for the Steelers is punishment enough.
Him playing is punishment enough for the Steelers.
He should have been suspended for a minimum one game.
Actually, as we speak live here on Wednesday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, he's actually in his appeal right now with the league, trying to get it either reduced or get to a finite number. And to the level that this is, and I don't want this to be the case because he is such a talent. To me, he needs to be out all of this year and all of next year. You cannot do this. To me, like you said, if he connects, and I understand you don't fully agree with it, and I get that. If he hit where he connected with Rudolph was on the underside of the helmet, the thinnest part of the helmet.
Yeah.
And it hit him, I think, more towards the top of the head. If he connects with Rudolph, as you alluded to, and you go down this rabbit hole, if he connects with Rudolph with the side of the helmet to Mason Rudolph's temple, it could kill him.
Yeah.
It could have killed him. The Albert Haynesworth stomping on the face of Andre Gerard, who did not have his helmet on, he put spikes literally to the man's head. That was as bad as it was as I've seen up until this point. You've turned this into a weapon, and I'm sorry. When you have a situation where, as I've said, Myles Garrett is lucky he was not arrested. He needs to be. You cannot reward him with just. You missed the rest of this season when you weren't going to the playoffs anyway. When you missed 7 games, I've been on this stance from the initial time it happened, and I've had more time to think about it because instant reaction isn't always the final reaction. You have time to sit and think and cool off, and your emotions cool on this. But this one is not cooled off for me. I believe he should be suspended for all of next year. Now I could see this not turning into that case, and maybe he sits out until Week 10 of next year, so it winds up being a 16-game suspension. 16-game suspension. I'm sorry, all of next year as well, from my perspective. And I know you're gonna disagree with that, and I get it. I fully understand why. But for me, there is nothing worse than this. Than if you go back to the movie the Last Boy Scout, and the guy literally pulling a gun out of his waist while he's running down the field and popping off dudes. As far as on field goes, this is the end all be all, and he needs to be out. Obviously the rest of this year, and for me, all of next year.
That's.
And I get why I can tell you think that's too harsh, and I get it.
I do think it's too harsh. Now I don't disagree with all of this season, and I posted on social media immediately after the incident that his season was done. I think that stands no matter what. Now and not that I necessarily disagree with the all of next season scenario. The reason I don't think it's going to happen, and as you mentioned, he's sitting in his appeals meeting right now.
I don't think it's going to happen, but if it were me, that would be the finite number I would lay down.
And here's the thing: I can see why the league could go that way because, again, as I mentioned, like if player safety is your ultimate hill to die on right now in the NFL. If that's your ultimate hill, your ultimate goal is player safety. You cannot allow this to happen, and there needs to be a strong message sent. To me, again, the few things that are going to factor into this, one being Myles Garrett's history, does not have a history of conduct like this. By all accounts, off the field, obviously getting sucker punched by a fan, no reaction.
He got a couple of roughing the passer penalties earlier in the season.
But again,
people are trying to draw that up as a little bit of a precedent.
But again, this isn't a Vontaze Burfict situation where chronic offender.
Burfict, for being a repeat offender for his last helmet-to-helmet hit against Indianapolis, got 12 games.
Yeah. I agree.
If you give him less than 12, if you give him less than
repeat offender, though, again,
no, I understand that. But if you give Garrett less than 12 games for this, you're basically saying swinging helmet is less of an offense than Burfict leveling out helmet-to-helmet hits.
I don't know. I completely see your side of it, and All right. Anyway, back. I don't know how to extrapolate. Other than back to the reason I don't think it's going to end up as all of next season. The people who are hearing the appeal, James Thrash and Derek Brooks, obviously previous players in the NFL. Both of them have a history of reducing suspensions. That's why I think out of today will come a finite number for the suspension. I don't know that it's going to be what would essentially be a 22-game or 23-game suspension. I think it does get levied somewhere in the 10-game suspension range where he does miss a portion of next year because of it. Obviously, the rest of the season, the initial part of next season, obviously, people are like, oh, missing the playoffs. Well, at this point, it's pretty evident that the Browns are probably not going to make the playoffs, save some historic run here to finish the season. But, I think the number needs to be larger than the rest of the season. I will stop short of saying all of next season. But again, the league, like you mentioned, the league has to send a message. If player safety is your ultimate goal, then there has to be a strong message sent here. And I don't put it on the same level as Vontaze Burfict because of the repeat offender nature of Vontaze Burfict and the lack of sympathy or remorse or whatever that is shown by Vontaze Burfict. I think Myles Garrett will be much more contrite in his response. Obviously, in his appeals hearing, by all accounts, Vontaze Burfict just doesn't give a shit. And I think that's one of the.
He did say that in his meeting after, because I guess people immediately started asking, what about Vontaze Burfict? Comparing Myles Garrett to Vontaze Burfict. And Burfict's quote was, "When I met with the commissioner, it was basically bullshit. He already had his suspension number in hand." Yeah, so again, way to keep yourself in the good graces of the league, Vontaze. You freaking moron.
Because what Vontaze Burfict's history and what he does, he
is a guy who clearly does not get it.
No, he doesn't,
and thinks it's his right to play in the NFL and not a privilege.
You look at the same scenario with a previous teammate of his with Antonio Brown. Some guys just don't get it, and Vontaze is one of those guys who just don't get it.
AB tweeted out a bullshit apology to the Kraft family and the Patriots because
trying to get back to getting a job. That's what you do.
Yeah, sure. Who believes that?
Yeah,
anyway,
again, we'll find out what the actual suspension ends up being. By the way, side note, also Maurkice Pouncey suspended for 3 games for defending his quarterback. I think that's equally as bullshit. I think his should get reduced as well. He's protecting his dude.
The thing is with Pouncey is punching and kicking at Garrett's head while he was down.
But again,
that's the thing I think that warranted.
I think his gets reduced. I think he goes down to 2 games. Again, the appeals are being heard by previous players who don't necessarily have the greatest history of playing clean.
The dude who blindsided Mason Rudolph after standing back up got 1 game, and I think the only reason why he got 1 game on it is because after the game he said he was protecting his teammate Myles Garrett. Yeah. All you did was take a cheap shot at the quarterback. You didn't go break up
an unprotected guy.
You didn't go pull Steelers guys off of Myles Garrett. You went and took a cheap shot at Mason Rudolph. So take your game and get it over with.
Out of this, I think Garrett gets a number. I think Maurkice Pouncey gets a reduced number, and I think there you go, Ogunjobi.
His is going to stay.
His will stay with 1 game just because you can't do it. But
Pouncey would go to 3-2. If I had to put a number on Myles Garrett, I would probably say, because they like to do even numbers, I would say 15.
15. I think it's 10. I think he ends up with around 10. Okay. Again, the rest of this season, he gets the first part of the next season.
And this is appeal. So whatever the ruling is, this is the suspension.
This is
he can't ask for it to be lower or more.
Yep. Now, again, back to the initial part. The indefinite suspension is complete bullshit. You have to put a number on this because this is on-field conduct. You have to give a number. Now, the other thing I want to mention real quick, and I know we keep dragging this on, but this is the big story of the NFL this past week. Freddie Kitchens not stepping up to suspend him on his own. Do you feel like that's a little bit of a?
I'm not surprised.
Like Freddie Kitchens should have stepped up and said, "Hey, he's done for the season."
I'm not surprised in that because no team's going to to do that.
But I think you have to, and I knew. If you're going to do that, you're not going to be wrong
because they knew the league was going. They knew the league was going to come down hard with it anyway, and you got to. We stand behind our players, and Freddie Kitchens. Said after the game. Obviously it's inexcusable. Baker Mayfield in his post-game interview on field saying he's going to be suspended, and he really hurt the team, and so on and so forth. Yeah. They showed contrition through their statements. I don't think the suspension from from Freddie Kitchens was going to do anything.
Nice for them to, especially Freddie Kitchens, who's a bit maligned right now just because they're underperforming.
If he does that,
had an opportunity.
If he does that, you have divided and possibly destroyed that locker room.
Yeah.
Because you now have him willing to throw one of your best players under the bus. You need to show that you are behind your players, even though they committed this terrible act. You have to show you're behind them. So I get why you didn't. I could see why you would raise that question, but I don't. It opens up a whole other can of worms because then all of a sudden we're in a situation where Myles Garrett says, well, "You're going to suspend me. I don't want to play here anymore. Trade me." And then you go down that rabbit hole, and then you have another Antonio Brown on your hands.
Very valid. I agree.
Let's move on to on the field action. And because we could spend a full episode on this and probably not cover it all in full detail. Monday night, Kansas City and the LA Chargers playing on another terrible field down in Estadio Azteca in Mexico. But I
thought the field was pretty decent, relatively speaking, compared to what it was last year.
Compared to where it's been,
it was a little tore up. Now to Estadio Azteca's credit, after last year's debacle of not even playing there, they went out and invested a ton of money to increase their playing service. They didn't. Nothing's been on the field in the last 2 weeks. Like they tried their best to make that field as best as possible. And to their credit, that atmosphere, now having never been there, that atmosphere looks pretty awesome.
76,000 people were there.
And it was a loud, raucous crowd the entire game, particularly for, obviously some fans have allegiances, but particularly for not being a football country. It looks like a pretty sweet atmosphere.
An American football country.
Yeah, anyway. I think it's a pretty cool deal. I do.
The big story out of the game is Phillip Rivers' willingness to share the ball with anybody, uniform color be damned.
Oh, my goodness.
Threw 4 picks in this one. He's thrown 7 picks over his last 2 games. I almost said San Diego. Wow, hashtag Fumblegate. LA's 4-7 on the year. All 7 of their losses have been by 1 score. Yeah. So they're in every game. But now you've got a guy in Phillip Rivers who is getting up there in age. He's near the 40 mark.
Well, and you add 10 kids in the mix, he's aging even faster.
There you go. He's thrown 7 picks over his last 2 games, and just about all of them have been very, very questionable decisions. You could hear Booger McFarland saying multiple times on the broadcast, being fooled by coverages that Kansas City's throwing at you. Kansas City's defense is not the 85 Bears. It's not the 2000 Ravens, nor is it anything close. And Rivers is being fooled by them. And we saw, even last week, Kansas City give up points in droves to the freaking Ryan Tannehill and the Tennessee Titans. I wanted to say Tennessee Oilers. I may continue to say Tennessee Oilers because it never made any sense. LA has a very, very interesting decision to make, and Phillip Rivers may be forcing them to do it or maybe earlier than they wanted to. I don't know that until these last few weeks that the Chargers were even thinking about a long-term replacement for Phillip Rivers. You see the question here. I think they have to look this year, this offseason to move on from Phillip Rivers, or at least get his replacement ready, whether that be in the draft. And we'll talk about that here in a second. Or maybe you go out and look in free agency and finally it's time for finally to say goodbye to Phillip Rivers. Now, one of the names out there in free agency, Tommy. That's a possibility.
Tommy's not going anywhere. As much as there's a smoke show, Tommy is not going anywhere.
I know, but they can't franchise him, and
he could die on the field if he wanted.
He's going into free agency, and he's got a lot of ties out in L.A. for his businesses. He's from California. His wife's based out in L.A.
He'll be okay.
I know. It's a possibility there. Okay, so if Tommy's not the option, and I believe LA should make a run at him anyway.
Well, yeah, obviously you got to throw the number out there. If Tommy's on the open market, you throw a number
what's
out
to
there.
Stop it? What's to stop the Chargers from offering him like a 2-year, like $90 million deal, fully guaranteed?
Nothing at this point, but it's not going to happen.
So if they don't do that, do they go early in the 2020 draft to try to find his replacement?
I mean, at this point, it looks like they're going to have probably a top 12 pick.
They're sitting at the 11th pick.
Yeah, and the way they've been playing, I don't know that that's going to change. Again, I think a top 12 pick is likely at this point. It's never too early to go look for a replacement, and you have to remember Philip Rivers replaced one Drew Brees there in San Diego at the time, now L.A. Part of this hurts me because Philip Rivers could be an effective quarterback, but like you mentioned, it's just to the point now where he can't read defenses. He's not, the talk now has become Philip Rivers is going to be remembered for the games he couldn't win, and I think that's an appropriate scenario or appropriate headline. He 61 one-score losses in his career, the most in the Super Bowl era by any quarterback ever.
You talk about not being able to win the close
Can't win close games by like the most one-score losses in the Super Bowl era, and he's not done playing. This year, when trailing by a score or less in the fourth quarter, he's 14 of 37, no touchdowns, 4 picks, 11.7 passer rating. The only quarterback in the league who's thrown more interceptions than him is who?
Punch face
Jameis Winston, of course. And their team's terrible. The expectations in San Diego and now LA have been so much higher for them in the AFC, where they have had seasons where people had thought maybe they're Super Bowl contenders.
They were, I think they were 12-4 a year ago.
Yeah, at a
1
minimum,
year ago.
At a minimum, being able to compete for league titles and playing in the playoffs. And unfortunately, as a former Philip Rivers owner in fantasy football, he always finds a way to kind of screw it up. And if you look at even teammates and social media and so on, it all looks eerily familiar as kind of the common trend that you see is, we know how the scenario is going to play out. One score game, the Chargers have the ball, and Philip Rivers is going to find a way to screw it up. Earlier in the season, 7 straight incompletes when they were trailing by 2, throws 7 straight incompletions, and then throws an interception to end the game. It just, for whatever reason, Philip Rivers just he's not a closer. He's not a closer. He can't close out games, and it's just, you want it to be better. And Philip Rivers, by all accounts, is a good human being. He's got 10 kids at home. Just cannot seem to figure it out, a way to get over the hump to win the big games or the close games or get his team to the next level. And for that reason, I think you're right. I think it's time to start to consider a replacement and who comes in to replace Philip Rivers. I don't know if this draft is necessarily the draft, but you have to look at like the weapons that they have. Like they have competent receivers. They have Melvin Gordon. They have Keenan Allen on the outside. Like they have competent skill players, and for that reason, maybe it is time to move on from Philip Rivers. Maybe it is time to go find, whether it's his replacement immediately or his replacement for a year or two from now. I think it's really time to seriously start considering it, and it's hard to say because of the longevity of quarterbacks from his era. You look at the guys that are a few years older than him, like Tommy, like Drew Brees, who are playing into their 40s. Like, by all accounts, Philip Rivers should physically be able to play into his 40s, but right now he doesn't look capable of playing into his 40s, and for that reason, it's probably time to move on.
Let me ask you this before we talk a little bit about the draft. Is he a Hall of Famer?
You know what? It's statistically, he's going to be up there, but like, again, if you look at the ability to win games and how is he going to be remembered, I think he's going to be remembered more as his inability to win games than he is at his ability to win games. And for that reason, it's going to be a difficult decision to put him in the Hall of Fame. Like, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head. I would imagine that statistically he's probably in the top 25 in most passing categories, yards, touchdowns, even games won maybe. But the inability to win the other games, the playoff games or the close games, again, 61 losses and 1-score games, like that kind of hangs over your head a little bit. And I don't know what Pro Football Hall of Fame voters look at.
They don't always look at win-loss record. Ask Joe Namath.
Yeah, ask Joe Namath, the worst quarterback in the Hall of Fame. I mean, a quarterback like Eli Manning, who's somehow going to get in with a 50% record in 2 Super Bowls. I don't know. Like the same question came up a few years ago when Carson Palmer retired.
No.
Is Carson Palmer Hall of Famer?
No.
Statistically, he's the top 25 quarterback, though.
No.
There's guys who have worse statistics than
That
him
is a
that are in
very.
the Hall of Fame.
Those two are very, very comparable. Now,
They
now that you
are.
they're
That's what I'm saying.
very
Like,
comparable.
They're very comparable. Neither of them won a Super Bowl. Neither of them really had a lot of team success. Now they had successful seasons, but overall team successes not great. Make bad decisions down the stretch. Find ways to lose games for their teams. Like good people off the field, by all accounts. They're similar people off the field. They're very good in the community, and they're family people, but it's a fair comparison, and by all accounts, Carson Palmer's not a Hall of Famer.
No.
What separates Phillip Rivers from Carson Palmer? Because statistically, again, not knowing the statistics, I would say they're probably on a similar plane statistically. So why would Phillip Rivers be a Hall of Famer any more than Carson Palmer's not?
I think Rivers has had a little more consistency in winning in the regular season.
A little bit.
I know it's not. I'm sure it's not a lot. But it's an interesting scenario between the two of them. I think also Rivers has stayed healthier a little bit more than Carson Palmer has. Of course, they both have had ACL issues, and we remember back to Phillip Rivers winning a playoff game in Indianapolis. I think it was with a torn ACL and nearly beating New England the following week with a torn ACL. So it's a very interesting comparison. Talk a little bit about the upcoming draft and where the Chargers could go. Again, right now they're sitting at the 11th pick. If they determine Joe Burrow's the end all be all, they're going to have to go all up to the number 1 pick to get him. And I don't see them being able to jump above 10 other teams to get to number 1 to get him. And number 2, it would be a very Bengal move of Mike Brown to move back from 1 to 11 for a team that may not win a game next year, maybe on another new head coach next year. So I don't think Burrow's a likely scenario. The other guy you'd probably still have to trade up for, not that high, maybe up to 5 or 6, maybe to 4, maybe if Miami dropped, is it like 4 or something like it, would be Justin Herbert from Oregon.
I'm not sold. By the way, we'll get to this later. I'm not sold on Justin Herbert.
I understand that, and not everybody is, but he's right now with Tua Tagovailoa being now hurt. Herbert is now the number 2 guy on the board.
Agreed.
And so he would be a guy, as we've seen, the teams have to reach for quarterbacks. You had it exactly right in our NFL draft preview back in the spring with Daniel Jones going 6th to the Giants when a lot of people thought they could have gotten him at 17 or wherever they had their second first-round pick at in the OBJ trade. So he would be another option there. You could also consider, if you're the Chargers, maybe addressing your offensive line in the first round because you need help there, and maybe looking at a guy like Jacob Eason who's going to come out of Washington in round 2. It likely will be a second-round pick. Maybe sneak into the end of first round again because we overvalue quarterbacks. He would be a guy you could possibly look at in round 2. Jacob Eason, quarterback out of Washington. Started his career at Georgia, now at Washington. He's a guy that, big frame guy, similar build to Phillip Rivers.
Yeah. Wouldn't have to change their offense for a guy like him.
Exactly. Yeah, he's not a guy you're totally revamping things for. And, another guy that would be out there in that second, maybe third round option would be Jalen Hurts, although you'd have to revamp your entire offense for him.
That does change your offense.
I don't know that Hurts has a long NFL career ahead of him.
We've said the same thing about other quarterbacks before.
True, but Hurts is, while he is undersized, he doesn't have the arm that Kyler Murray has. He
can't sling it even like a guy like Lamar Jackson. Yeah. He's not nearly as fast as Lamar Jackson.
So
but we've seen quarterbacks like that still be
successful. There are options available, but more than likely the Chargers, if they decide to commit to a quarterback, especially in round 1, you can't sit at 11. You're going to have to go up. You
have to go up or you got to go way back.
Exactly.
The 11 range is either I'm taking a guy as a starter as a reach, or I got to go up and get the guaranteed starter, or I got to go back and find a guy who's going to be a year-long project.
And if with Jacob Eason, you draft him, he can sit behind Phillip Rivers for a year or two and learn and take over, similar to what you talked about, the Brees to Rivers transition. So the bottom line is the clock is ticking now for Phillip Rivers, and the ticks are getting louder. I think it's fair to say. Let's move on here as we're wrapping up this week on Fumblegate. 3 games to pick. Big one tomorrow night in the AFC South, as we're learning as the year's gone on. Maybe the AFC South is what we thought it would be at the beginning of the year, and a very, very mediocre division. Indianapolis,
competitive but mediocre division.
right? They're all just kind of meh. Indianapolis went wild on Jacksonville last week in the return of your favorite quarterback.
Big Dick Nick.
He was okay, but
He was all right.
their defense.
I want him to be better. But although I will say I liked Gardner Minshew's time, and
Are you just jealous because of the stash on the jorts?
his stash is nice. And by the urban legends that surround him are great. By the way, how about Danny Dimes going out to trademark the Danny Dimes name? I think that's a smart move. Being in New York, I know you don't like it, but being in New York and you're only as good as your image. You might as well trademark your nickname, even though you don't like it.
Trademark it and never use it.
But trademark it, and then every time somebody else uses it, they got to pay you for it. That's a smart move. Like, you're in New York.
No, it's a smart move to do.
I know you don't like the nickname.
No, the nickname is god awful.
It's a smart move for Danny Dimes to go out and trademark it.
It is one of the dumbest nicknames.
It's a terrible nickname, and he didn't pick it, and that's the beauty of nicknames.
I'm sure it gives Trent Dilfer the willies.
I didn't get to pick the nickname Fatty, but I got to live with it. Like, that's just the way it is. Like, I got a teammate. His name is Chunky, and he didn't get to pick the nickname, but his nickname is Chunky for the rest of his life. I got a teammate, Eric Guycheck. His nickname is Goober. For the rest of his life, his nickname is Goober.
See,
he didn't get to pick it.
The thing is,
Danny Dimes didn't pick the nickname. He just has to live with it. So if you're going to live with it, you might as well trademark it.
That's describing a physical trait.
But he didn't pick it. You might as well live with it. Like, if we could trademark Punch Face, I would trademark it. I should look into that.
You should look into that.
Shit, that's a great idea. Hashtag Fumblegate. Don't listen to that.
Anyway,
I'm not doing that.
So Indianapolis on the road at Houston, first place here in the AFC South of the line. Houston got demolished by Baltimore, and as we saw, Houston's offensive line still sucks.
Still not good.
Deshaun Watson was
running for his life.
He was sacked 6 times, 5 in the first half. It was never a ball game. This was again varsity against, I'll say JV, because the Bengals are the epitome of freshman high school in the NFL.
Yeah. Lamar Jackson ends another game with sunglasses instead of a helmet.
Yeah, and near perfect passer rating. So Houston licking their wounds, going back home to take on Indianapolis. I say Houston rebounds here in a very tight game. Obviously, a critical game here. The winner moves into first place by themselves in the AFC South. I have Houston winning 23-20, and I say Indianapolis has 20 because Vinny will miss another extra point.
Please don't do that to Vinny. Vinny got the game winner.
They're bringing it. They're now to the point they're bringing in kickers to work out.
They are, but like the GOAT, like how do you replace the GOAT again? It's like, one of those things. Like,
I'll tell you, replace the GOAT.
You should let Vinny die on the field.
You tell him, Adam, we're trying to get into the playoffs here, and you keep missing kicks. It's hurting us.
Well, then he just fixes it because that's what Vinny does.
I want him to fix it, but I'm saying it is what it is.
It's so sad to see the end of an era. Like,
he's closer to 50 than he is 40.
I know. It's just one of those few things. Like, very few kickers in this world that I respect. Like a lot of punters, don't like a lot of kickers, but Vinny's one of them I can appreciate. I like Vinny a lot.
Who's the other one you respect? Janikowski because he's a drunk?
Yeah, the Polish cannon. I don't know. They're just very few kickers.
Anyway, back to the game.
Anyway, back to the game. You know what? I got the Colts winning this one. I can't trust Houston's offensive line. I just can't. Like, and the Ravens are good. The Ravens are really good, and they have a good scheme, and their defense has always been pretty good. But just like, talk about getting a blueprint on how to get after the quarterback for Houston. Like, Indy's getting some really good film on how to get after the quarterback, and Deshaun Watson's good when he's protected, but when he's running for his life, he makes bad decisions. And I like Indy in this one, and a credit to Jacoby Brissett, who's played pretty well. I like Indy in this one. I like him to take the 1-game league in the division. Again, this division is separated by 2 games, top to bottom. We mentioned it. Maybe it's just because they're garbage, or maybe it's just because this is a pretty competitive league. But unfortunately, right now, it just doesn't look like the wild card's going to come out of this division, so you got to win the division.
This is a one-team division.
I like the Colts to win the division, and
okay.
I got them winning this week.
Big one Sunday night, potential NFC Championship preview. Green Bay at San Francisco. This should be an absolute doozy. Sunday night, prime time. I like Green Bay here in this one. I have them winning 27-21 for the main reason. I don't trust Jimmy Garoppolo right now. He seems to, he'll have moments where he looks like Tom Brady, and in other moments he looks like Jameis Winston. and it just inconsistency from week to week, from game to game, from series to series. And I know San Francisco's defense, especially their pass defense, is the best in the NFL. But I like Aaron Rodgers to go on the road here and beat San Francisco again. 6-point game, I have it 27-21, mainly because Jimmy Garoppolo has been way too inconsistent. And I know they're San Francisco's 9-1, but they're relying on their run game, which has been very good run game, and one of the best defenses in the NFL.
Good defense.
Absolutely. So that's why I like Green Bay to get it done here on the road. And again, these two teams could very well meet in the NFC Championship.
I agree with you. I'm breaking the microphone over here again. As mentioned previously, this is a matchup of two former coaching teammates, as you will.
Your name drop at any chance you get.
Well, the tweeter just noticed this one as well yesterday. Matt LaFleur and Rob Saleh used to be roommates and GAs together at Central Michigan. I actually like Rob Saleh's defense. I like the 49ers defense in this one. Bosa making people look foolish this last week. Like, their defense is really, really good. And for that reason, Aaron Rodgers, again, you talk about not working well under duress. He doesn't work well under duress. And I don't like Jimmy Garoppolo. I don't necessarily like their offense, but I like San Francisco's defense more than I like Green Bay's offense. I got San Francisco winning this one. And I like the home game. It's a across the country trip for Green Bay. Obviously, it's cold up in Green Bay right now. They got a bubble and everything. Unlike some teams that are north of the Ohio River who don't have a bubble, Bengals, like to practice outside all season, even when they're going to play in Miami in December. They want to practice outside.
Or you're going to play a playoff game in Houston in a dome.
Yeah, Mike Brown doesn't want to have an indoor practice facility. Screw that $1 million investment to put a bubble out there. But it's not the same. Going out to San Francisco is not going to be the same as practicing in a bubble up there in Green Bay.
Yeah.
I like San Francisco's defense.
Okay.
Whatever they're doing, they got it figured out right now, and they're pretty daggum good at it.
Yes, they are. All right. Lastly here on Fumblegate, America's favorite game.
Will they cover?
The Cincinnati Bengals back at home after putting up a decent fight against Oakland, held them to just 17 points.
They tried hard. They did. They got off the plane and didn't just cash it in right away. They tried hard.
They did. 17-10, Oakland beat Cincinnati. Oakland did not cover.
Yeah. Again, difficult news for us here at Fumblegate because we both thought they would cover. And they did not.
Well, Cincinnati's back at home this week, and Pittsburgh's all kinds of banged up. Likely not going to have James Conner. Likely not going to have Juju Smith-Schuster.
Bunch of not having Marquise Pouncey.
Not going to have Marquise Pouncey. He's suspended. They will get Benny Snell back, they believe, for this week. So
good for him. And by the way, we like Benny Snell here.
We like Benny. That's right.
Not just because he's a UK guy. Now you like him a little more because he's a UK guy. I just like the way he plays. Benny Snell's a hell of a football player.
Yes, he is. Bengals 6.5.
Not even getting the full touchdown.
And I think it's because Pittsburgh is so banged up, and of course Pittsburgh.
And because they kind of showed up there in Oakland.
The incident also with Myles Garrett in Cleveland also overshadowed the fact that Mason Rudolph was terrible.
He was not
against
good.
Cleveland. He was so bad in that game, and it's forgotten about because of what happened afterwards. So the Bengals 0-10, less than a full touchdown dog against 6.5. So you're assuming the extra point. Do the Bengals cover?
You know what? No, I don't think they cover. I just don't. Here's the thing. Now the Bengals are coming off a better game. Like here's an interesting stat for you. I saw this week. You know the Bengals are averaging more yards per drive than the New England Patriots are this year. More yards per drive than the New England Patriots. And we can talk about that later. New England Patriots aren't actually having a very good offensive season.
That's fine. You can move it between the 30s.
But for that reason, the reason they can move the ball, but they can't find a way to score. Now, they don't kick field goals, and they don't score very well. What about the Bengals gives you confidence in them doing anything like this? And the Steelers coming off what is it turned out to be an emotional loss because of the scenario that happened after, basically the last play of the game there. nothing about what the Bengals are doing gives me any confidence in them moving forward. And I think the Steelers are going to come in amped up, obviously, to send kind of a message. Take that for what it's worth, but send some sort of a message based on, how the last game ended. They really kind of want to come out and show something. And I think the Bengals end up becoming the whipping boy because of it.
Which team? This game's at Paul Brown Stadium on Sunday afternoon. Which team has more fans there?
Steelers, 100%. It's not even close. Like
they're gonna be available for cheap. By the way,
yeah. By the way, if you want something cheap to do in Cincinnati on Sunday, go ahead and get Bengals tickets. You can probably get them for free if you show up about 10 minutes after game time, because all the guys scalping them at the end will probably just be giving them away.
I'm actually trying to look that up as we speak.
Yeah, and I'm sure it's cheap.
Here we go. Well, it'll bump up a little bit because it's Pittsburgh.
Well,
and everybody.
Tickets as low as $30 is
$30.
Yeah,
30 tickets as low as $30.
For those of you who don't know, face value, the cheapest ticket in the stadium at face value, I believe, is $85 right now. So 30 is quite the deal for an NFL.
It's a good value. Just eat and drink early.
Yeah, I got the Steelers will show up. Steelers fans will show up in droves, and Cincinnati fans we know are fickle, and obviously at 0-10. They will not be in a hurry to get to the stadium. There will be a select few, but in general, I mean, I was there for 3 years when we were relatively competitive.
Things were going pretty good,
and the Steelers fans still outnumbered the Bengals fans. So when you're 0-10, you're definitely going to get outnumbered by Steelers fans. In fact, there's probably more Steelers fans, people who are willing to admit it. There's probably more Steelers fans in Cincinnati right now than there are Bengals fans. Because we know Bengals fans, they're losing, and if you're a fan of a team in the tri-state, if you're losing, you stop watching, so you probably started cheering for somebody else with relatively close proximity. And Pittsburgh's not that far away for tri-state fans to cheer for.
4.5 hour drive.
Claim that they're local. I like them. That's what Cincinnati fans do. For those of you who don't know,
I say Pittsburgh wins 21-13. So in fact, the Bengals
do cover.
They
well, the Bengals cover. The Bengals do not.
The Bengals do not cover. So yeah, that's where I'm at there. So Bengals in that case, they'll go to 0-11, and we'll keep this thing rolling. Actually, we're probably just going to keep it rolling. And if the Bengals get one win, then we'll talk about maybe them and Washington together on will they cover, because Washington only has one win. They're committed to Dwayne Haskins, and everything in Washington sucks too.
Well, the head coach isn't great. Their owner obviously is terrible. Now, I do question.
Boy, that sounds familiar.
Yeah, we could have a whole show on this. Which owner is worse, Daniel Snyder or Mike Brown?
You know the answer to that.
Franchise?
You know the answer to that.
I don't know if I do right
Which
now.
I
don't know if I know the answer.
Which one's willing to spend?
But he doesn't even know how to spend the money.
Like, he's willing to do it.
On who? Albert Hainsworth?
Is he willing to do it?
Albert Hainsworth?
I know, but is he willing to? I'm not saying the money's been spent wisely in any way, shape, or form. But is he willing to do it?
But he's not. He's not committed to putting.
Remember, Mike Brown once gave Antonio Bryant 4 years and $28 million, and he didn't make it out of training camp.
Touche.
So there's one instance of him willing to spend, and probably the last time he said, I ain't giving a free agent any money again. Son of a bitch. All right, anyway, so that's it. We're out of time here on Fumblegate, and follow us on the Twitter, at Jason Grefer. Follow the show, at Fumblegate.
At Fumblegate Fatty.
We'll work on trademarking the punch face thing going forward, and who knows, maybe Jameis Winston will be somewhere else next year, punch face. Carolina has said
he might be, because
Carolina's owner has said he won't stand for long-term mediocrity, and yet he still employs his own punch face there, who is out for the season. But so we'll see what happens there, and we will see you next week, or I will see you next week. You're actually going to be out of the country.
I'm going to be out of the country next week, taking a Thanksgiving holiday with my wife's family. We're all spread out all over the country. We are actually going on a cruise with my wife's family. It should be a really, really good time. I'm kind of excited about it. 5 a.m. wake up on Friday, though. Not too excited about that. But once we get past that, waking up 3 kids at 5 a.m. to get to the airport by 6 a.m., we'll be all right. May come on next Wednesday so you can have all of Wednesday to enjoy Fumblegate and then enjoy your Thanksgiving. If I had some internet, I could do the call in, but I don't do cruise ships. I don't know how the internet works. So first timer here, folks. You're gonna pay willing to pay like $6 or $7 a minute. So if anybody wants to sponsor that, Fumblegate@gmail.com. If you want to sponsor my internet usage on the ship, more than willing. We'll see if that happens next week here on Fumblegate.